Defense in depth is one of those phrases that shows up in almost every security conversation, yet very few teams can explain what it actually looks like in day-to-day work. In this narrated edition of the Tuesday Insights feature from Bare Metal Cyber Magazine, we are going to treat defense in depth as a practical design choice instead of a slogan. The goal is simple: help you picture real layers that work together, not just a long list of tools.
Think about the last serious incident your organization dealt with. After the dust settled, did it feel like multiple safeguards stood in the attacker's way, or did it look as if everything depended on one fragile control that happened to fail at the worst time? Maybe it was a firewall rule that never got updated, an endpoint agent that had quietly gone missing, or a log source that no one realized was disabled. Defense in depth is meant to stop those single points of failure from turning into full-blown breaches, but in many environments, it remains more of an ambition than a lived reality.
At its core, defense in depth is a way of arranging people, process, and technology so that no single mistake or control failure is enough to cause heavy damage. It is not a product, and it is not just more security tools. It is a pattern. You place different kinds of controls along the paths attackers and accidents are most likely to follow, so that each step has more than one chance to block or reveal something harmful. One control tries to prevent the bad outcome, another watches for it, and another helps you respond when something slips through.
This pattern lives across the whole environment, rather than in a single box or platform. You see it in identity, when strong authentication combines with clean role design, privileged access workflows, and sign-in monitoring. You see it in networks, when segmentation, inspection, and simple deny-by-default rules limit how far an intruder can move. You see it on endpoints, when hardening, patching, and monitoring reinforce one another. In the cloud, it shows up as secure baselines, continuous validation, and runtime detection working together around important services and data. It is also important to be clear about what defense in depth is not. It is not tool sprawl, where multiple products inspect the same traffic in the same way just because budgets allowed it. It is not security by obscurity, where you rely on hiding systems or using non-standard ports. Those tricks might slow an attacker for a moment, but they are not the foundation of real depth. The idea here is that an attacker will eventually discover your systems and test your defenses, so you deliberately design multiple independent hurdles that each create opportunities to notice and contain them.
In practice, a good way to think about defense in depth is to follow an attack path from beginning to end and ask what stands in the way at each step. Start with something common like phishing. A secure email gateway blocks many malicious messages. Awareness training and clear reporting channels help people recognize suspicious messages that slip through. Endpoint protection can stop certain payloads from running. Identity safeguards limit the value of stolen credentials. Network segmentation prevents easy lateral movement. Logging and analytics pull together odd behaviors so an analyst can see the pattern. No single layer is perfect, but each one offers another chance to stop or spot the threat. When you look at it this way, you start to see that shared signals matter as much as the individual tools. If your email system detects a risky link, your identity platform sees unusual sign-ins, and your endpoint product flags a strange process, those signals mean more when they can be seen together. Log aggregation, alert routing, and basic automation become part of the layering. They make sure that when one layer notices something odd, the rest of the system can react, whether that means blocking a session, opening a ticket, or paging a human being.
You can also see defense in depth in familiar, everyday use cases. Remote access is a good example. In the past, a VPN alone might have been considered enough. A layered approach might add strong authentication, device health checks, just-in-time privilege elevation, and monitoring for unusual session activity. Each control targets a different piece of the risk: who the user is, whether their device is trustworthy, what they can reach, and how they behave once connected. A single failure is less likely to hand an intruder the keys to the kingdom. Email and collaboration platforms show similar patterns. You might have filtering for known bad content, education so people recognize social engineering, safe link rewriting to reduce the impact of clicks, endpoint protection for malicious attachments, and strict limits on what a compromised account can do in cloud apps. A quick win for many teams is to strengthen the linkage between these layers without buying anything new. For instance, you can route certain phishing detections into a visible chat channel or ticket queue so someone always sees them, turning quiet alerts into actionable signals.
More strategic layering shows up in identity, cloud, and application security. Around identity, you might combine strong authentication, careful role and group design, privileged access workflows, and continuous monitoring of risky sign-ins and access patterns. In cloud environments, you can pair baseline configuration policies with scanning, runtime threat detection, and automated remediation of drift. For applications, layers might include secure development training, code scanning, runtime protection, and clear playbooks for what happens when something suspicious is seen in production. The common habit is that whenever a path to important data or actions is identified, you ask what happens if the main control fails and what backs it up.
Done well, defense in depth brings very real benefits. The most obvious is resilience. A single missed patch or misconfiguration is less likely to lead straight to a serious incident because something else catches it or slows it down. That gives your team more time and more options. Instead of waking up to a crisis where everything is already on fire, you are more likely to encounter earlier, smaller signals that something is wrong and can respond before customers or critical operations feel the full impact.
A second benefit is better visibility. When different controls observe the same behavior from different angles, they help you build a clearer picture of what is actually happening. A strange sign-in that lines up with an endpoint alert and a new outbound connection is a much stronger clue than any one event in isolation. This richer context can improve investigations, tuning, and reporting. It helps you demonstrate in concrete terms how combinations of controls are lowering risk, which makes conversations with leadership and auditors more grounded.
There are trade-offs, though, and it is important to be honest about them. Every new layer introduces cost, complexity, and operational overhead. Without a design, you can end up with overlapping tools that create redundant alerts and hard-to-follow workflows. Skills become a limiting factor because each control needs to be configured, tuned, and understood. Integrations can be brittle, and it takes real effort to make sure alerts land where they should and trigger useful action instead of noise. Defense in depth also has clear limits. It cannot compensate for missing fundamentals like an accurate asset inventory, decent identity hygiene, or a functioning incident response process. If all your controls rely on the same incomplete data or the same broken process, you can still suffer cascading failures, even with plenty of tools in place. Marketing messages can sometimes give the impression that more products automatically mean more depth, when in reality, you might just be multiplying the number of places where things can fail in the same way.
You can often spot weak or hollow layering by looking at how tools are used. One failure mode is simple duplication. Multiple products looking at the same traffic or events without any clear plan for who responds when they trigger. Another is installation without integration, where a platform is deployed, but its alerts never make it into the systems or channels where people actually work. On paper, you have several layers. In real life, no one sees or acts on their output quickly enough to matter.
Ownership is another critical factor. If no one is accountable for how layers fit together around a particular risk, the design tends to drift. Network paths change, identity rules evolve, cloud services are added, and suddenly, controls that once formed a solid chain now have gaps between them. If incident reviews only look at individual tools rather than full attack paths, these gaps can remain invisible until someone stumbles through them. Healthy signals of real defense in depth look quite different. Critical business journeys are mapped, from initial access all the way to important data or functions, with clear notes on which controls sit where. Alerts from different layers converge into places where specific people or teams know they are on the hook to respond. Metrics focus not just on raw event counts, but on how quickly layered controls detect and contain real issues, and how often single points of failure still appear in incident narratives. Over time, that mindset turns defense in depth from a slide in a presentation into a system you can adjust. After an incident or a tabletop exercise, the question becomes less, who missed this alert, and more, where could another layer have given us a second chance? Small changes, like tightening a network segment, improving an identity rule, or tuning a correlation, are guided by a shared mental model of how layers should support one another along key paths. At its heart, defense in depth is about designing your environment so that no one control, process, or person has to be perfect all the time. It assumes that mistakes, gaps, and surprises will happen, and it tries to make those events survivable instead of catastrophic. For you as a working security or IT professional, that means looking past tool lists and asking where depth really shows up in the work your organization does every day. You do not have to rebuild everything at once. Start by picking one or two high-value journeys, such as external access to a critical application or the path from a phishing email to sensitive data. Trace how an attacker or accident might move along that path. Ask what stands in the way today, and decide where an extra, well-chosen layer would make the most difference. Those concrete, focused improvements are how defense in depth stops being a comforting phrase and starts becoming a practical way of steering your security investments and energy.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.